Welcome to Good Sex at NYU, a podcast about sex, relationships, health, and mental health in a sex-positive space. So if you're looking for sometimes serious, sometimes funny, and always sex-positive discussions, then you're in the right place. I'm Danielle Elliman, Associate Director of Sexual and Relationship Respect Services at Counseling and Wellness Services. I use she, her pronouns.
And I am April Fellers, a nurse and sexual health educator at the Student Health Center. I also use she, her pronouns. We are two white, cisgender, heterosexual, female-identifying clinicians, one with a medical background and the other with mental health experience, who seek to create a space that is inclusive of all identities, backgrounds, and perspectives.
So today on Good Sex at NYU, I am joined by Sharang Biswas, who is a game designer, writer, artist, and educator. He completed AB and BE in biotechnology and biochemical engineering from Dartmouth College, and a master's degree from the Interactive Telecommunications program at NYU Tisch. Not only do you teach at NYU Game Center, but you also taught at Dartmouth, Fordham, and Parsons, as well as lectured at the University of Cincinnati, Columbia, and DePaul universities. Additionally, he has been game design artist in resident at the Museum of Moving Images and a teaching fellow at the International Center of Photography in Manhattan. He has won a number of awards for his games, including Indicate, IGDN, and ENnie, and has been named guest of honor at multiple international game festivals and published essays, fiction, and poetry. He loves role-playing, interactive storytelling, and immersive theater, as well as cooking and swimming. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience before we get started?
I have my first book coming out end of this month. Wow. It's called The Iron Below Remembers. It's published by Neon Hemlock Press, which is a small press that specializes in queer-themed speculative fiction. Okay. And it has been described as very horny by a couple of my reviewers. So
can we get a little more about that?
Yeah, the quick plot thing is that it's set in a world where in the ancient times, India was like a global colonizer. They were like the Romans and the Mongols put together. They colonized all of the world. And they did that because they had access to giant robots that they knew how to make. And so now it's the present time, and an archaeologist named Lakshman finds buried in the earth one of these giant robots, and he's like, amazing, this is the find of the century. I really hope this will make me more famous than my boyfriend, who I'm really, really jealous of because he happens to be a superhero.
That is hard to compete with.
And so it's I really want to write a superhero book that doesn't focus on superhero shenanigans. Like that's actually in the background. It's about this relationship between these two people, and this guy's ambition, but they have a lot of sex, and it's not a very steamy book. It doesn't have a lot of sex scenes or anything in it, but they talk about their sex very, very openly. And the main character talks about, I do a lot of kinky things with my boyfriend. He is my boyfriend. Yeah. And he does kinky things with other people because he is very hot and people want to have sex with him. So it's described as very horny by a number of different reviewers.
I can see why. And I love that, they're having lots of, not maybe described sex, but they seem to be having lots of different types of sex. And
I've written work which has more sex in it, but that didn't fit this work. Yeah. But I also wanted to write about two queer men who are unashamedly sexual. Yeah. And so the book has a lot of footnotes because it's told in the perspective of an academic. It has 113 footnotes, I think. And many of them are him saying, my boyfriend and I did this once, and then we bought a fur costume for that. And I learned this technique because of when I was tying my boyfriend up into this rope tie, and things like that.
It just becomes very normal talking about it.
I think so. That's the way these characters are. That's also kind of the way I am, and it's my first book, so I guess I put a bit more of myself into the characters. Yeah. But yeah. So.
Yeah, well, congratulations. That's
Thank
really
you.
awesome.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
A book is a lot of work.
I'm very pleased with myself. I'm like, wow, not everyone writes a book, right?
No, that's impressive.
Yeah, I'm very pleased. I'm very happy that my publisher and editor, had faith in me to do this. It was a commissioned work, technically. I didn't pitch it. He asked me to write it.
Awesome.
He's like, he saw a short story I had. He's like, can you expand this into a book length? And I'm like, I can. So,
yeah.
I was actually inspired by a tweet, even though I don't like Twitter anymore, but I was inspired by a tweet a long time ago, which was like, when we write romance, this book doesn't really follow traditional romance beats, but it is about a relationship between two people. But when people write romance, we often focus on like first love or new love between two people. And he was like, this Twitter thread was about like, why don't we focus on like relationships that exist and how make that a romance? And I'm like, okay, so I'm going to try writing about an existing relationship and how their relationship evolves and strengthens and stuff like that. So
yeah, I love that, because oftentimes you do really center, or not you, but like our culture centers first loves or last loves, and they don't really follow up with that. Like, I've really wanted to see something of a relationship that maybe is in its like, really hard, difficult times where maybe like you do open things up. What's that discussion? Not all about just, hey, how do we like navigate? Like we're going through a dip.
Yes.
And
that this book is like this guy who's jealous of his boyfriend, and how do we navigate that?
Yeah.
That was.
Well, that's really cool. Hopefully you'll share the link with us so our listeners can
absolutely. Yeah,
find it easily.
we're trying to organize some like readings around the city.
Okay.
That's
exciting. So with that, can you shift gears and tell us a little bit about what you like most about being part of the NYU community?
Yeah. So I joined the NYU community in 2013 when I came here for grad school, right? And that was really cool. Well, my grad program, I have a lot of bias towards, because I had a lovely time in grad school. So I went to the ITP program, like you mentioned, at NYU Tisch, which is a very unusual program within Tisch, I would say. It is not what people first think of when I say I went to Tisch. They're like, oh, you went to drama. I'm like, no. You went to film. I'm like, no. Like, what did you do? And I'm like, oh, I went to ITP. It's like an interdisciplinary art design technology program, right? And the program, not because the program wants it, because the nature of the students there tends to be very insular. They tend to be like, yeah, we're doing our own thing. But something I liked then was that I remember the Tisch graduate student organization tried to do a lot of programming that brought different graduate departments together at Tisch. So I actually there was a grant that I was awarded twice, one each year, that aimed to bring together people from different departments to create artistic work. So that was something I liked a lot. And now, years later, I'm faculty, right? So I teach at the Game Center. And what I really like about the Game Center faculty is actually how tight-knit and supportive the faculty can be. So I remember the first day I was teaching. So I'd already had teaching experience when I started teaching at Tisch. And I remember the first day, my department, not my academic chair, but the administrative head of the department was like, okay, what can I support you? We're going to have a little thing about teaching technique and what do you need from me to help you? And here's some tips about like how to deal with your first day of class. And I thought that was really good. And then very soon I had my area head be like, Sharang, I'm going to observe your class so I can, and it wasn't like, I'm going to observe it to see if you're good. Right. It was framed very much like, I'm going to observe it so I can like help you become a better teacher. And then my department chair is really, really good. And every semester when I get my evaluations, I set up a meeting with her and I'm like, hey, I have some thoughts about my evaluation. Can I go over some ideas with you about improving my class for next semester?
Yeah.
And I get only support from the faculty at the Game Center.
That's great.
So I've really, really enjoyed teaching at NYU.
Well, good. That's always good to hear. I don't really hear it from that perspective very often. So I love to hear that you get that kind of support.
Yeah. Obviously, I can't speak with every department.
Right. No,
it's a huge school. Yeah. But the Game Center, I've had a really, really good time teaching.
Awesome.
Them.
Yeah. So we have a set of questions that I normally ask. And I want to just let you know, I want to try to create safety and equity in the space. So if ever you want to turn any of those questions around on me, I'm happy to be vulnerable with you. Also, the fact that, this can sometimes be a lot. But if you have any questions that you want to ask me, right? I'm happy to, sort of be there with you. And if there's any boundary that we cross, then I'll definitely honor that.
Sure.
Because again, it's a lot to ask to someone to come in and talk about sex and relationships. So
Totally.
With that, we've talked a little bit already about some of these things, I think even with your book, some of the themes, but how has the broader culture influenced you in your personal choices in life and dating?
Yeah.
So some of those big ideas that can sometimes be positive and sometimes be maybe somewhat harmful.
Yeah, so that's a big question, right? Because the nature of sociology is that like Durkheim wrote about how like social forces are invisible to us, right? Yet we are influenced and affected by them a lot.
Yeah.
So you have to actually dig in to see how has the broader social thing affected me, right? Because so I was born in India, but I grew up. So when I was like 6-ish, 7-ish, I moved to the United Arab Emirates, right? I moved to Abu Dhabi and I lived there until I left for college. I went to Dartmouth for college, right? And so as you might imagine, Abu Dhabi, the UAE, is very strict in terms of sexuality. And for example, there's no sex education at schools. That is not allowed, if I remember correctly. I don't know the actual laws very well, but it's not really allowed. It's never taught. And like often websites, whether or not they're porn or educational about sex, they're treated the same way and they're just blocked. Right? They're like, no, you cannot access. In fact, I remember when I was a kid, there was a thing in the newspaper because a bunch of doctors were complaining that certain like medical sites had recently been blocked. And they're like, hi, we're doctors, we're gynecologists, we're GPs, we need access to this information. So the culture around sex when I grew up was very like hush hush, like you don't talk about it. And it wasn't like it wasn't, to me at least, it wasn't even like in America where you're not supposed to talk about it, but kids talk about it a lot. For us, even kids, we wouldn't talk about it a lot, or if we did, it was very full of a lot of shame, right? Like, oh, what is this? Oh, right? I'm not a sociologist, I don't know why, but there's a lot of like Islamic culture and blah, 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 right? All kinds of things. And also, there isn't as much freedom of speech in many Gulf countries. So you can't like just talk about stuff openly. And so I think maybe, again, I said it's hard to know, but that's what I'm interrogating. Maybe I started being extremely open about this kind of thing in undergrad as a reaction to being forced to be completely not open about this, right? I remember that even like getting this explanation and sex talk from my parents was very strange. Which was funny because my parents are fairly liberal-minded people, and they were always like, yeah, like, we're not like strict parents, feel free to date anyone, blah, 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 right? But I remember like it was 10th grade, right? So I was fairly old when my dad was like, read your sister's biology textbook, read this chapter and let me know if you have any questions. And I'm like, do you think I don't know about sex at this point? 2, I'm like, have you ever looked at a biology textbook? They don't really give a sex talk. They're like, let us talk about zygotes and gametes, right? And the third thing, I had read the entire textbook the previous year for an advanced biology class I'd taken, so he seemed to have forgotten that, right? So I'm like, okay. I knew what he was going to, but I was feeling kind of awkward with my dad, so I'm like, sure. And then he came up to me a few weeks later, he's like, did you read it? I'm like, yes. More than once because I had to study it. And he's like, do you have any questions? I'm like, no. He's like, you mustn't have read it properly then. And I'm like, really? And then he like forgot about it. And then it was like weeks or months later, my parents sat me down and they're like, we need to talk to you about this. I'm like, I know about this. And my dad's like, how? And I'm like, I'm a reasonably bright individual. Like, I found ways to learn about this. And my mom was like, no, okay, don't worry about it. And then years later, this was this winter before I left for college. We were in India for my cousin's wedding, and in Hindu culture, one of the things you do is the bed where the bride and groom spends their first night of marriage, you like decorate it with like flowers, and you like do all this kind of cool stuff to make it seem cool because, first time of marriage celebration, right? Yeah. And so I was helping with that, right? With all kinds of chores at the wedding house. My dad was like, wait, do you know what this bed is for? And I'm like, oh my God, are we doing this again? And he's like, oh yeah, I remember I explained it all to him. Like, you explained nothing to me. You got embarrassed. And he's like, oh. So there's all this cultural silence around this, which may have affected me so much so that a lot of my research and work and stuff is about sex, because I do strongly think that this is a topic we need to discuss a lot more in a lot more different way, in a lot more different ways, in many more different ways, in order to demystify, to give voice to people who have seen, like violence and things like that. Because I firmly believe that if this became a more culturally acceptable topic to talk about, then we would be more open to like looking into it. We'd be more open to finding what the problems and issues are. So yeah, and I think probably that comes from me not speaking about it, not hearing about it, not knowing much about it until I was like, this is gonna maybe TMI, but I didn't start to masturbate until I was 17, right? Which is fairly old.
It's on the older side, maybe
right?
on average. Yeah, like I was, a good 8.
Right?
But I didn't know what it was called.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know what it was. Like, I was already, when I was 17, because a friend of mine were talking about, one of my friends who had a crush on, he was like, Sharang, I'll get you some porn and you can watch it. It'll turn you straight. And I'm like, okay. And I watched the porn. I'm like, it did not turn me straight. And then him and this other friend were like, Sharang, no, you didn't watch it well enough. Spend the night with us and we'll make you straight. And I was like, I don't think spending a night with you two will make me straight. And then they went beetroot red and they're like, that's not what we meant. And I'm like, so I didn't know a lot of things. I was a lot older and I had to seek it out myself. And when I came to the States, I'm like, great, I'm going to delve into this topic a lot.
Yeah.
And I did. So
yeah, but even that I think is like one of those maybe more harmful beliefs. Not that your friends had, negative intentions, but the belief that you could turn one way or the other is one of those like horrible beliefs.
And we came from a culture, like we lived in a cultural milieu where straightness was good and everything else was not good, right? Even I had that belief and had to fight with that belief when I was realizing, I think I might be gay, right? Because of this surrounding. And people are like, oh, were your friends mean? I'm like, no. They were young and they were dumb. All of us were young and dumb, so I don't actually hold it against my
But I think it's like the broader culture. Like it wasn't necessarily them. They didn't have like the curiosity yet to like investigate it.
They also like it takes a lot of bravery when you're young to break away from the beliefs that you are growing up with, right?
Yeah.
It's a very hard thing to do, right?
Yeah.
To break out of this like system of thought that you're in, right? So I don't hold it against any of them, and I don't think of them as bad people to be like, oh, we thought we can turn you straight, like whatever. They were like, we were like 15 years old and idiots. Now, if they say that, I'd be like, you are far more educated now. Now you should know better.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that my comment wasn't necessarily to blame them, but I think like some of those like things that we need to, maybe we just sort of look past or overlook or sort of minimize, we need to investigate a little bit deeper and make sure, like, again, that's maybe a poor example, but how the broader culture has really sort of impacted us. Have we internalized any of that?
Yes.
And again, that's probably not the best of examples, but as like,
no, but I think that's so true though. And I internalized so many like harmful ideas that I had to unpack when I was in undergrad, when I was married, like all kinds of ideas. That is why I strongly believe in liberal arts education, because I think being exposed to ideas from various people, from various academic disciplines, from various modes of thought is really important to forming your view of the world and helping you be a better person, more inclusive, more thoughtful, more empathetic,
Yeah, more authentic. If you can unpack some of these things and decide, what do I actually believe versus like, what have I been told? And what is like ingrained sometimes even in our like DNA. Like we just kind of feel like it's so a part of us, but like, is that really what we feel and believe?
And I really try and carry that through into my teaching as well, because I got so much out of having liberal arts education. So, for example, I teach an introduction to video games class at Fordham. It's like one of the only video game classes at Fordham. And we do our normal thing. We learn to code a little bit. We learn game design principles. But we also have a day where we talk about what is it like representing race and ethnicity in games. We have a day where we talk about sex work and what representing sex work in games has been like, could be like, should be like, can be like, because I think, games is an art form, and humans use art forms to interrogate the world and our place in it. And games are like every other art form. So I try and show my students that, you can interrogate all kinds of ideas with games, including sexuality. I'm teaching I started a new course this semester at NYU. It's a graduate level games course on romance, sexuality, and intimacy in games. Yeah. We're really delving into that. We're going to have and again, lots of different perspectives. So we have a sociologist who's going to guest speak about purity and abstinence cultures. Her doctoral dissertation was all about promise rings. So she's going to talk about that. We also have a really famous gay porn star as another guest speaker, talking about what it's like being a sex worker in that way. What was it like doing porn, things like that. Because I want different opinions and things to be shown to my students. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love that. I think that's, the basis of this podcast is we really want to inspire people to investigate what their own influences were growing up and is that authentic to who I am today and who I want to be in the future.
Yeah, and it's like I have one grad student who has told me that they have thriving OnlyFans, so they are in some sense a sex worker. And I have another student who's like, in my country, I cannot talk about this. This is why I want to take this course, to talk about this in a setting where it'll be non-judgmental because it's an academic setting. And so I'm really hoping that these students will have exactly what you said, be able to explore their authentic self, what it means for their, these are mainly game design students, not all, but what it means for their art practice, but what it means for them as people, right? Because I feel the idea that education is only to turn you into a corporate drone, to make you a busy bee worker, is a false idea. Education can help with working in job skills, and in fact should, but also help in finding your place in the world and who are you and what are you as a citizen and how are you contributing to society and what is society and what does it mean, right? So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. I want to ask you more about your class in a moment, but I also want to go back to something that just has piqued my curiosity around when you came to the U.S. to go to Dartmouth. What was that transition like for you to be in a space where you had more opportunity to talk about it?
Yeah. So it was very funny. So I arrived in the U.S. A month before my classes started because I got into a young global leadership program not affiliated with Dartmouth. It was like a leadership youth camp kind of thing. So I did that for 2 weeks before heading up to New Hampshire. That was in New York and DC. And then I head up to New Hampshire and started pre-orientation there. And it was called the Young Global Leadership, something like that. I forget the exact name. But that was the first time I was in the States, right? Okay. Before that, I'd been to Canada because my sister went to undergrad in Canada. And I was very young then. I was 14 years old or something like that. So this was the first time I was in the States. And I was that whole idea of when you go to college far away, you can reinvent yourself, explore yourself, or no one knows anything about you before. So, tabula rasa. So that was my idea. So I arrived at this leadership program and I'm like, okay, I'm in America. I have heard it's much more liberal here. So I did that, it was very dumb, but I did the classic thing that a lot of queer men do, where I first said, I'm bisexual. Because there's this idea, whether or not it's true, but there's this idea that bisexual men are more accepted because they also like women, so they're less threatening. That's not necessarily true. There's a lot of biphobia in the world, but that's the idea that young queer men often have.
Another one of those ideologies.
Right. Another one of those weird ideas, right? So I started with that. I told my roommate at this program that, I like swing both ways, is I think the words I used for him. And luckily, he was really nice. He was South African. It was like a very global program. There were people from all over the world in the program. He was South African. He was very nice. He was very attractive. He was like, yeah, totally. No worries, dude. Like, yeah, thank you for telling me. Whatever, right? And so that happened. I'm like, oh, okay. So maybe this is nice.
You're feeling it out a little bit.
Yeah, feeling it out a little bit. I don't say I'm bisexual anymore. I'm very gay, even though I do feel that sexuality is more fluid than the labels we put on it.
Yeah.
But in general, my behavior comports to being a gay man. Also, what is a gay man? Lots of complicated questions. I've read a ton of academia about this.
Lots of ideologies around that too.
Right. Anyway, but so that's not out of the scope of this conversation. Okay. Read some queer theory. So I did that, and then I'm like, okay. So then I was going to Dartmouth. I still hadn't told my parents, really. Kind of. That's a complicated question, but whatever. So I went to Dartmouth, and I'm like, okay, I'm in college now. College is supposed to be like both exploration time and also supposed to be really fun. And so I'm going to just be really gay. I'm going to join the LGBT club, the first thing, and I did. And I'm going to be a flaming faggot. And I was. And I slapped. But so that, because I actively made the choice to be like, again, related to this idea that I couldn't do this. I did come out in high school within my year. It wasn't the safest thing to do because it's actually quite illegal and I was a bit dumb doing that. But whatever, it happened.
You're okay.
I'm okay now. It worked out. I don't recommend everyone has to come out in high school if it's not safe for you to do so, right?
Yeah.
But I wasn't like, I am gay. Yeah, I just like told people, right?
Yeah.
But now I'm like, I'm in college. I've never dated anyone. I had never dated anyone, sorry. And I'm going to date and I'm going to blah, blah, blah. So that, and I joined an organization called the Sexual Health and Pleasure Peer Advisors at Dartmouth, which had the fun name of Sexperts. It doesn't exist anymore, I don't think, but it was like a quarter-long training where you had literally a whole class every week. It was not an academic class. You had a whole class every week, and then at the end you became peer advisors because the idea is that sometimes college students are more comfortable talking to peers as a first step, talking about issues about sexuality, before like seeking medical help or before seeking counseling or before seeking anything like that. So I did that. That got me really educated because there was a lot of things I didn't know. Again, I didn't have any access to sex education as a kid. So I think those things, and then as part of the LGBT group, we had a lot of funding to go to conferences and things. So I went to a bunch of queer conferences in New England, basically, and a couple in like other areas as well. And so I forced myself to educate myself about these kind of issues and topics. I was one of the I was this for I think 10-ish years. IVQ, the Inter-Ivy LGBTQIA conference took place. The first time it happened, I went, and then the second to like fourth times it happened, I was one of the organizers.
Okay.
So I really made all this happen for me in the States, in college. I felt very strongly about delving into this. So.
Yeah. Sounds like some of those, it sounds like some of those institutions were really influential.
Yes, I think so. And yes, there's a lot of criticisms of every higher education institution, as there should be. Like, we should interrogate all institutions that we're part of, especially ones that have authority. But I got a lot of support from Dartmouth to do all these things. Like I when I was head of the LGBT organization for a while, I brought tantric sex practitioners to campus to give workshops. I brought porn stars to campus to give talks. I was supported by academic department, like the gender studies department co-sponsored bringing this porn star to campus, for example, right? So I actually did get a lot of institutional support, which I thought was really positive, that the parts of the institution felt strongly that these kinds of issues need to be discussed. And then after graduation, I was a board member of the Dartmouth Gay and Lesbian Alumni for a while. And this summer, in fact, is the 40th anniversary of that organization. I'm going up to Dartmouth for a reunion. I'm going to give a talk. So I'm going to panel talk about LGBT life.
That's
and
great.
stuff. Yeah. And so I think one thing I want to say is that that institutions need to support this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like it is very powerful for students who belong to historically marginalized communities to get institutional support in the form of organizations, funding, classes even, right? Leader, like seeing faculty who are queer and out and not just like hiding is very... I've had students at Fordham come up to me and say, it was very inspiring to see a queer man of color as my professor in a class that wasn't about gender studies, right? Or queerness studies or race studies or something like that, right? They were like, it was very influential that you are a computer science professor who is a queer man and you are South Asian and you are whatever. And I'm like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad I helped by just existing. But I think... So this is me urging universities and other institutions like that to keep supporting these kinds of initiatives and issues because they're very valuable for students.
Well, and I would also just add that it's very valuable for institutions to do that because there's also, you're coming from a place where perhaps other institutions haven't. Like you were talking about where you were from, how, say, the government as an institution may not have been super helpful in your journey. Media sometimes isn't very helpful in our journeys, depending on where we're at and what we're viewing, what we have access to, right? So like, we need spaces where we can. And so I'm glad that you were able to get that.
Yeah, and like I said, in American culture, it's a little bit different in other cultures, I feel, but in American culture, university is viewed as a very formative experience in one's life, and there's a cultural notion of you do a lot of growing up in college, also that you make a lot of mistakes and you have somewhat of a permission to make mistakes and learning from them, and that is an excellent time to foster all these ideas. So I think universities can do a good job in helping students foster these ideas and things.
I completely agree. I do wish that, younger aged folks had more access to some of this, because I think that harm and a lot of things are happening in those in-between years too, but at least they're going to be able to access that at some point, hopefully.
And universities also, yes, I think more resources should exist for younger age groups, but university is also a time when many people are away from their parents for the first time. Obviously not everyone, many people. And that freedom is a space where growth can happen. It's the separation more officially from... Right. And like my parents, I told you, they're very liberal-minded. They were like, we want you to go to university far away from us, unless you have a really good reason not to, or like we're not going to stop you from university nearby, but we encourage you to go to another country because being in another country will expose you to different modes of thought and learning and everything. And I'm like, this is good.
That's excellent. So what were some key interpersonal relationships that really shaped your views on sex and relationships?
Yeah. Let's see. Well, I think my friendships with queer people in college were actually quite key, sorry. Partly because I didn't have queer out friends before that, right? Because again, I was in the UAE, didn't happen, right? So just being around queer people, I was like, oh, wow, we can all be different people. Queer people gay men aren't all the same. At that time, media portrayed gay men in a very simple way.
Right.
It's become much more nuanced now, even though there's a lot more we can do. But just that was very powerful. I was like, oh, wow. I remember after I went to the first IVQ was at Penn. I remember one of the Dartmouth publications, I think The Dartmouth, which is the Dartmouth newspaper, interviewed me and was like, what do you think? And one thing I remember saying was that in the keynote address, I was like, sitting in the audience, I looked around the room and I'm like, there were 400 other queer people in this room. And I'm like, that had never happened to me before. I'd never been in a space with so many queer people in one space, right? So that was thing. But then my boyfriend from college is my best friend now, right? We did it for 3 years, and he has been my best friend for 15 years. Right? We've known each other since undergrad, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah, I talk to him all the time. I see him all the time. I'm when I go for reunions, I stay with him. I don't stay on campus, And that, he was my first boyfriend, but also that made me think about, right now I'm polyamorous, right? And so that relationship really made me think about that, because he knew. Freshman year, I went to a conference I think this is the one in Worcester, Massachusetts. I think it was Transcending Boundaries conference. And I heard their famous sex education specialist and author Tristan Taormino talk about what is polyamory, right? What is non-monogamy, basically. And that, I was so happy I saw that at a young age, because that happened before my ideas of dating were calcified, right? Because I had ideas of dating, but because we weren't very open about it in Abu Dhabi, like I hadn't strengthened many of the idea, because we didn't talk about it that much. We only saw it on media. We're like, ooh, some people date. So I came to college and I went to this talk and I started thinking about, oh, right, non-monogamy. This seems correct for me, right? And so when I was dating my college boyfriend, I was like, I don't think I'll be monogamous. But he didn't want to see other people, right? But he was like, you should see other people. And we did that for 3 years, right? And I think that was very influential to me about, like, what does it mean to be in a relationship, and
to set boundaries and have them discussed and followed. And
so that was a really big one. And then while I was dating him, I started dating two guys at Columbia, because I went to Columbia for IVQ. And I ended up marrying one of those guys many years later, right?
Okay.
Then we stayed married, and then we got divorced. We got divorced right around the time of COVID.
Okay.
And my ex-husband was another, I would say, key personal relationship that made me think about dating stuff, because we got married fairly young. We got married as soon as I graduated grad school, so I was, 24, 25 then. So that's, I would say it's fairly young age to get married. He was 24 then as well. And so we kind of like grew together, right? We like grew and formed more ideas about what it means to be in a long relationship. He was like the fourth-ish person I kind of dated, third-ish person I kind of dated. No, he was the second person. The third came after him, yeah. He was the third person I kind of had a serious relationship with, right? So I hadn't dated that many people. And we were open from the start, right? We never had the conversation, should we be in a relationship? We went in assuming we had no relationship, right? Like a lot of gay men do in New York. Not everyone, but a lot of gay men do that. But we grew up together, because I just come out of college, right? So we grew up together. That really informed what it means to be in a relationship, what it means to be polyamorous. And when we got divorced, our divorce was not acrimonious at all. It was not mutual. I wouldn't say that. He went to get divorced because he's like, I think I'm not in love with you anymore. And I was very sad about that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't acrimonious. I'm like, okay, you're not in love with me anymore. This makes me sad, but there's nothing really I can do about this. People are like, are you going to fight for him? Like, what fight for him? That's silly, right?
Yeah.
So we separated very amicably. And a year, so this was during COVID, right? So when things opened up again, he moved to Paris. And when he moved back, he invited me up to his family home again in Connecticut. I knew his family quite well. We'd been married so many years, right?
Yeah.
And we were hanging out together at his family home, and we were talking about how why do we get divorced? Like, well, we were young, and we changed as people, and we grew as people, and we became adults as a married couple, basically. So we grew and realized that we shouldn't stay married. So that was really important in making us think about like what it means, what love means, what it means to be with someone and stuff. So yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing. I think that's really powerful to hear, like that you can grow up with someone and still have love and care, and that you can still not have a relationship work and have it fail, so to speak, and quote unquote, and have it still be good.
It's an interesting word, right? Because we decided in that conversation, and this is when we were driving back. Second conversation, we were driving back. He was driving back to New York. He was like, we were like, I don't think our relationship failed. I think our relationship ended, right? Because we were together for 10 years, and we had a good time together. I would say we had a lovely time together. We gained a lot. We learned a lot. We had a lovely time. And then it ended rather than failed, because I would say failure would be like if we hate each other or there was some awful thing that happened.
No, you're right. I like that language better. Right? I think I often will say we have one of these ideas again is that like divorce is a failure. And it's like I want to shift that, because like you got something out of that. Yes. You took something from that. Yes. You grew, you're a hopefully a better person having known that person.
And like, my ex-husband has guest spoken in my classes before, right? After our divorce, right? My ex-husband is a filmmaker, and I was teaching a class at the new school about narrative design and throughout the media, and I wanted a film person to give a talk, and I'm like, okay, my ex-husband's giving a talk. Like, your ex-husband? I'm like, yeah. Right? So I like talking about the idea of the relationships end. They don't necessarily fail. They can fail, but they don't necessarily fail. And I think that's part of the Tristan Taormino in that way long ago conversation talked about this idea that we have this cultural model of what a relationship looks like, and it escalates, that you start casual, then you date, then you become serious, then you move in, then you get married, then you have children, right? That this is the only trajectory a relationship can take, right? And we're like, that's not true, right? It's not even counting non-monogamy. Even if I'm monogamous, it is perfectly valid for us to be married for a while, then we got divorced because we realized we're not for each other in that way, and then move on, right? That has nothing to do with non-monogamy. That has everything to do with relationships don't need to progress in this ladder climbing towards nirvana kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I completely agree that it's not a failure because it's just like an ending. We all have endings in our life. Like sometimes it's our friendships, right? I think we're much more comfortable with a friendship has ended. It doesn't feel good.
Even though it can feel equally bad, exactly, right? I read a Times article a few years ago how like friend breakups can be as painful as romantic breakups. But we don't think about a friendship as hierarchical in that way. Like our friendship will continue until we are in each other's will, right? We don't do that. We let it be like whatever. And I think we as a game genre is interesting, right? Because games make you think about very quantitative things about humanity. So even games that are about relationships are very, like, there's an undergirding of computer code, right? Which is like, when you hit this level of friendship, they will start doing this, right? Real human relationships are not like that. They're more nebulous. They're more messy, they're more, I don't want to say mystical, but there's something that we can't really ever fully understand about. They're friendships where I don't see the person very often because they live on the other side of the country, but whenever I go visit them, it's like...
You never left.
Yeah, it's like you never left, and we're still close, whatever. So like human relationships are... I think we will never be able to fully map and plan out relationships because they're interesting and messy and weird, and I think that's beautiful. I think it's good that relationships are like that.
Yeah, I think you're speaking also to another of those big ideas that there is this hierarchy, and that oftentimes our romantic sexual relationships take priority, and that they're different, and so you have to be in that kind of monogamous relationship in order for it to like show that you're being happy or that you're happy in your life. And that's just, I hope, is shifting and changing quite a bit these days. I saw an Instagram reel the other day where this woman was talking about why are we not like emphasizing our friendships more, and and I was like, I've been trying to do that for a while now. I hope everyone gets on board that friendships really are something that you need, even if you have a partner or partners.
Yeah. And also, like, I have friends who I sleep with sometimes, right? Like, the definition of friendship and what is not friendship is let people define it themselves. Like, I have close friends who I'm like, occasionally I will have sex with them, right? But we don't consider ourselves like partners or whatever.
Maybe it just depends on the type of intimacy you want to have in that moment.
You have with that person and the chemistry you have with that person. There are people who I used to sleep with, and then we just stopped, and we don't feel like we are going to again, but we're still friends. And there's no reason we stopped being intimate. We didn't have a breakup of any sort. We just kind of don't feel that chemistry anymore in the same way. Just like a lot of married couples stop sleeping with each other after many years of marriage, and that's not a failure in the marriage. I know culturally we have this idea of like a happy marriage is one in which you're having sex. Is your sex life healthy? I kind of push back on that because like relationship, again, different kinds, right? And that's why if non-monogamy were more acceptable, you could have a marriage with someone and get sexual fulfillment from other people, right?
But some people are asexual,
some people are asexual, right?
Some people just don't have the energy. There's other mental health or health issues that are happening. So I agree that if we could change what we see in media and not just have, and I think there are fewer romantic comedies, but if we could have, movies that reflected, hey, I'm going through this, really difficult time, or hey, I'm just asexual. Like, I've been putting on this performance most of my life. I got married, and actually, it turns out, this is what's happening for me.
There's that lovely line in the TV show Sex Education where Gillian Anderson's character tells a young woman, sex cannot make you whole. So being asexual cannot mean you're broken, right? Because a girl comes up to me like, I think I'm broken. I don't want to have sex. And she's like, well, sex can't make you whole. So you're not broken.
Yeah. And we all have different appetites and cravings. And we all have
they change
different
as
time.
well.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, again, I don't like this idea of like I said, I say I'm gay because that's currently what I'm feeling, but who knows? That might change, right? People's ideas and intimacies and stuff change throughout their life. And I like how there are a couple of movies here and there, so there is some media that explore that messiness, right? And in my book, I really want to normalize a gay couple who is like open but intimately, they're intimate with each other in terms of, I don't mean sexual intimacy, they're very intimate in terms of their feelings and stuff for each other, but they are open in other ways. I want that kind of like, I don't know, but also that's not what the story is about, right? Because often that's what stories become about.
Exactly.
Like, this is a movie about polyamory. This is a movie about opening a relationship. Like,
or this is a movie about kink.
Yeah.
i.e. baby girl.
Right, exactly, right? But I still want to watch because I do like Nicole Kidman.
I don't like the power dynamics.
I haven't seen it. So
I haven't either.
Curious. I'm very curious.
It's a little bit of a turnoff because it's like it's a employee-employer situation. We could have had it different power dynamics. But anyway, I don't want to go off on that. But I'm wondering if you can share if there's been any internal messages that have been oppressive for you that have taken you some time to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I grew up in a culture that was very homophobic, right? And so I when I was a kid, I remember middle school making dumb jokes about gay people and stuff because that's what was normal, right? In quote marks, normal. And so that took me a while to be like, well, it's sad because it took me being gay to realize that was bad. Hopefully, I like to think even if I weren't gay, I'd still at some point realize that is bad, right? Hope so. But so that was a big thing. But then also, even when I was like, no, I am gay, I had all these internalized messages of no, but you have to be masked. Because if you're not masked, then you're a sissy or well, you're a pansy or those kinds of words that we used to use, right? And even when I got to college, I'm like, oh yeah, you can't be femme or effeminate. That's not a good way of being gay. That took a while for me to realize no, that's a really dumb idea. Just let people be who they are and whatever. People can be people, right? That was a big thing. That was quite bad. That I slowly, again, through college, through meeting all kinds of people, through education, through extracurriculars, through going to all these conferences, I learned to unpack. I'm like, where is this coming from? This is dumb, right? Another thing was, like I said, we just talked about this idea of non-monogamy and stuff, right? Because again, I came from a culture where yes, you get married and have children, and then your life is done. And going to Tristan Tarinia's talk about no, this is not how relationship models need to be. They can be this for you, but they don't need to be that. And a compelling argument is that it was that she was I would hazard that for many more people than you realize, non-monogamy is the way to go, right? It isn't that it's for everyone, but it's for more people than we think. And she was like, we have so many people cheating on each other and doing this kind of thing. And she took that as evidence to be more people might benefit from having discussions about non-monogamy, right? It might still not be for them, but from the fact that people want to have what I think I learned a word recently, extra-dyadic relationships outside of their established relationships. The people keep doing this. This seems to show that more people need to be thinking about what non-monogamy might mean for them, right? So that was very powerful to me. I remember being oh yeah, because there's so many rom-coms and stuff where the whole situation would be solved if the couple sat and talked and said, hey, maybe we're non-monogamous, or I think I want to sleep with other people or something, right? Rather than the narrative your usually boyfriend cheats on you and then you get revenge on them by doing something nasty to them, right? That is funny when I was a kid, but I'm where is this coming from, right? where is this coming from? So those were the two big ideas of like gender presentation, and that of course leads to ideas of gender issues and trans issues and stuff as well, and that I had to really unpack, and then ideas of like relationship monogamy and hierarchy that we just talked about at length that I had to unpack. Those are like the two big ones that my collegiate experience really helped me break out of, I think.
Yeah. I'm really connecting to a lot of that as well. I feel like we come from very different like places. I'm originally from Kansas, but also had to unpack a lot of that. Even though like it's in a different space, I feel like had to unpack a lot of the, I'm tall, I'm athletic, and I sometimes get perceived as masculine at times. And so it's like, how does that make me feel? And I'm like, I'm supposed to be a certain way. So I definitely connect. Just let people be who they are.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because people assume when I talk about this is because I grew up in a religious household. I did not. I grew up in an atheist household. My parents are both non-religious, right? As in, when I was 5 years old, my parents took me aside. I was living we lived in India. It's very common to have households live with grandparents and uncles and things, right? So that's how I lived in India when I was very young. And I remember my parents took me aside and said, all the like religious stories your grandparents tell you, my grandparents are Hindu, those are wrong. And I was like, what? And so from a very young age, I was raised non-religious, right? Okay. And so it wasn't that I had religious pressure, but like I talked about Durkheim earlier, right? I had sociocultural pressure because I grew up in Abu Dhabi and this was the world I was in. Yeah. And my parents, even though they're not religious, they were still in a monogamous marriage and everything. My parents are divorced now. I was just surrounded by this idea. Is it people assume always that these ideas of sex and relationships come from religion? And they do not just come from religion, right? Like I grew up completely non-religious. Yeah. And I think that's important to recognize that this is not always about like your church or your mosque or your temple or whatever telling you this.
Yes. And religion often informs laws that do impact sociocultural.
Yes, that is also true. So that is actually a really good point. Islamic law is the law in UAE, right? So that does impact, right? Which clearly impacts the freedom of speech elements.
Right, but not you on an interpersonal level. It didn't have an impact. It's more on the institutional level.
I think
that
so,
we were. So I'm curious more about your two worlds kind of converging because I heard you talk a little bit about your video game class. Super fascinated. I wish I had, the capacity to take it because I think it'd be really interesting. But I'm wondering, what do you find is like the influence that these games have on the people who play them on an ongoing basis? Because I know that, this is probably a biased statement I'm going to say because I don't play video games, but some of the representations I have seen haven't like depicted women well, haven't depicted a lot of situations well. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are and feedback is around this.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm going to set a baseline first, right? The baseline is using the idea of violence in games, right? People tend to demonize games as the thing that makes people violent because there are a lot of violent games. I agree that there should be a greater diversity of games, but I don't think there's something inherently wrong with violent games. Just like I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with a violent movie or a violent book, right? And there's been decades and decades of research that show that no, playing a game about violence is not going to make you get up and shoot up a school or something, right? That's not how this works. However, media portrayals of things do impact how you view the world, right? So while I don't agree that any negative depiction in games will immediately make you that negative thing, I do agree that negative depictions in games influence your worldview. So I do agree that, so that was my baseline, right? Okay. So with that, I do agree that yes, historically, there have been a lot of negative portrayals of gender and sexuality in games. There have also been a lot of hidden, queerness being hidden and marginalized. Also, most games just do not ever talk about the topic of relationship sexuality, which is very sad, right? Because games are one of the biggest art forms in America and in the world, right? In America, the games industry is monetarily bigger than the music and film industries combined.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And so it's a media, it's a medium that has huge influence on everything, right? And media absolutely influences our vision of what is reality, right? The Marxist thinker Antonio Gramsci talks about this idea where hegemonies maintain power by controlling what is considered normal and the common sense. Okay, he wrote about this in his prison diaries about like if someone in power can make a certain phenomenon normal, that's how they maintain control. For example, of course 2 men can't get married. That's just weird. The normal thing is for a man and woman to get married, right? That was the prevailing idea not that long ago, and still for many people to this day, right? If you interrogate really deeply why it's not normal, their arguments tend to break down, or often for many people fall back to, because scripture says so. And in fact, many scriptures do not say so, right? What you consider to be normal and common sense affect your worldview. And in the current age, what is normal and common sense is informed by media. You see constant exposure to this. And you're like, that is normal. That's what I see all the time. And of course, that's what normal is. And so as a powerful medium, video games, this is going to sound abstract and theoretical, but video games as a medium have a responsibility to show diverse representations, right? And so I think we should have more games that talk about relationships, sexuality, and romance, not just as a core theme of the game, which I think is great. Like, we're looking at a lot of games this semester in my class that look at that as a core theme of games, but also as side themes. Like, just as we were saying, right? A lot of games have characters and narrative. It is very powerful to just show characters who are queer, who are non-normative relationships, or, things like that, right? Like people talk about Life is Strange, right? Life is Strange, I think, won a Games for Change award. Life is Strange is not a game that is designed to it was not conceived of as a game that educates you. It's kind of a game where a girl can freeze time and go back in time. That is the thing of the game, and they want to tell a rich story and a rich narrative, and they added queer themes into it to tell a rich story. It isn't a game that's designed to teach you about queerness, right? But just having queer elements in it is very powerful, right? In fact, some people might argue it's more powerful because someone can go into the game not necessarily thinking about queerness at all and taking away cool queer themes from it, right? Because often games that are about queerness, people are like, that's not a game for me. I don't want to play a game about queer. I'm not queer. I'm straight. This is something that's not for me, right? Which is sad. But people might avoid it. The people who need to view that might avoid it. But game where it's a side theme, it's just a theme, a side thing, and the game is about other things. I think that can be really powerful. So I think games have a responsibility to show positive depictions of these things because they create what our viewpoint, that they create what our norms are, right?
I would just add, I think they reinforce some of those norms,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
You're already sort of understanding these beliefs in the culture, that have been there for generations, centuries. And so what you see in those narratives are oftentimes just reflections of what's already going on. Similar to movies and music, right? It's often okay, I'm going to listen to what already reinforces those beliefs that I already have.
And the sad fact is there are many people who get all their understanding of these topics from movies and music because they don't have, their parents don't want to talk to them about this, and their friends are on the same boat. And they're like, well, where do we get our ideas about what dating and romance is? From movies and games. Right? And so again, like I said, a game is not going to make you become a blah, 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 or whatever, but it does make you think, it changes the way you view that phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
So
I have two questions, game related. One
Yeah.
is, what are some games that you would recommend? But also, I want to hear a little bit more about your class and how you incorporate some of the themes around sex and relationships.
Think about games. So I think I'm going to give a couple. I think a really interesting game is a visual novel called Dream Daddy, a dad dating simulator.
Okay.
It is really lovely. It was a very indie game and then kind of exploded. It kind of gained a sudden following. Excuse me. It is a visual novel where you play a single dad. You can decide if you had a wife or a husband before, you decide that, and you have a teenage daughter. And the game is you have moved to this new neighborhood, and it's full of these hunky single dads, like they're like 6 other single dads, and it's a dating game. So you like date all these dads and decide who you're going to end up with, right? And it's really lovely because it uses the word daddy in multiple senses of the word, right? As in, it's about like, ooh, you're dating all these daddies, but also you're raising a daughter. And that's a big part of the game as well. Like, what does it mean to raise a young woman? Like, she's thinking of college, she's having her own issues, while you are also trying to, like, date someone, find love and stuff. So I think that's really powerful. It's really lovely. It gives there's a discussion in the queer games world about the balance between showing utopic visions of queerness, where there's not a lot of, like, homophobia and violence, versus games that show all that to make sense of the actual experience and the real world of the lived experience of being queer. So this one falls in the utopic camp a bit, where it's like, there's gay dads everywhere, right? Or queer dads everywhere, I should say. Also that game is really cool because it's inclusive in terms of the word dad. You can be trans. You can just not define that. You can choose to wear a binder. So it's really cool that way.
Yeah.
So that's a really lovely game. What else? I'm trying to think. A really famous, easy answer is a game called Monster Hearts. It is a tabletop role-playing game. It's not a video game.
Okay.
It is by Avery Alder, who's a very famous game designer. She's actually guest spoken at NYU more than once, I think. I'd known her work before. I'd written about her work before, but I met her at NYU at a conference talk that she gave. And now I'm one of the, like, officiants at her wedding. I've been friends with her many years now. She's having an interesting wedding with multiple officiant like people. But she has a game called Monster Hearts, and it is a tabletop role-playing game. In an old interview, she says that it's inspired by the book Twilight. Because she says bad fiction makes for good gaming. Right? Because you can lean into the tropes and stuff. And it's a game where you play, the 4 or 5 of you that are play as different types of monsters hidden in a high school. So you could be a vampire or a werewolf or a witch or a ghost or things like that. And you all go to school trying to keep your identities hidden, right? But the game is very queer, very messy, very makes you think about what it means to have desire. Every character has something called a sex move, which is something that happens when you have sex with someone. And it's a monstrous thing that happens. It has this thing, a big mechanic people talk about is this mechanic about turning someone on, where you could turn a character on and they can turn you on, and the idea is you roll dice to determine that, to show, and this shows that you don't have control, especially as an adolescent, about what turns you on and who you turn on, right? Intimacy is messy, and you might have thought, I'm super straight, and I'm turned on by this other person, or I'm the gayest, platinum star gay, whatever it's called, but oh no, but now I'm attracted to this person. What's happening, right? It also uses idea of this mechanic called strings, which is like the social currency, which is about having influence over each other. And it's a really interesting game. A lot of queer people talk about this game as very formative in their thoughts about queerness and the messiness of being queer, and how it's not cut and dry labels and things like that. I gave a talk last year about queer monstrosity, and I really used Avery Alder's game as an example for that. So I would really recommend that if you're into tabletop role-playing games. Let me see if I can do one more. I'll do a little plug. I co-edited along with Lucian Khan a book that was published by Pelgrane Press. It is a book of 8 tabletop and live-action role-playing games, all investigating, interrogating, and exploring ideas of sex. Specifically sex, not even romance. It's sex was our mandate. And some of the games are very, in quote marks, tame, right? So there's one game that I'm going to run with my class, which is young teens, like 13-year-olds, at a summer camp, at a sleepover, simply discussing what they know about sex, and they don't know that much, right?
Okay.
They're discussing, oh, my sister and her boyfriend like drive to this spot sometimes, or like my dad tried to tell me this and blah blah. So it's young teens forming their ideas about what sex is, right? So that's one game in this collection. My game in the collection is about 2 ostensibly straight frat boys who keep having sex with each other and not talking about it. It's called The Echo of the Unsaid. But the game asks the players to physically have sex with each other in the real world. The game asks the 2 players playing, who don't have to be men to play, but the game is about men. It asks the players to perform oral sex, to mutually masturbate, and to make out with each other, right? Because as part of, we got 2 grants for this book. Some of the games are attempting to see where does the boundary of what games ask you to do lie, right? What happens when players in a game start having sex with each other in real life? Does that change the way the players engage with each other? Does that change the narrative? Does that change the permeability of, are we in the game? Are we not in the game? It's very highfalutin artsy book, right? We have all these, we had like 10 game designers who think of very like artsy ways they think about games contribute to the book, right? And the book also has a very robust intro that talks about like calibration tools, like you are playing with real people. How do you negotiate boundaries and consent and things like that before the game and then during these games, right? We had Maury Brown, who's very thoughtful about this, write a whole chapter about that. And then we put that chapter up for free on a famous LARP website because we think that chapter is just valuable for people to read about consent and calibration in games. And so that book is called Honey and Hot Wax, an anthology of erotic art games from Pelgrane Press. It doesn't have a physical version because it came out during COVID and it's a digital version only. But I would check it out. We also, proceeds for that go to safer sex organizations.
Oh, that's great.
Partly, so that's nice. But yeah, so that is a nice collection. Again, that's a plug because I was part of that. But that is a collection of 8 different games. The chair of the NYU Game Center, Naomi Clark, wrote the foreword to that.
Oh, okay.
And at the end of her foreword, she also writes something very powerful, which is like, you don't have to play these games for it to be valuable, right? You don't have to play a game where you perform oral sex on someone else, right? Yeah. She contends that even reading the games makes you think about the possibilities of games and sexuality and how the 2 are intertwined. So
that's great. Those are some really great recommendations.
Yeah, one video game, one analog game, and one weird collection that I made. Yeah.
So we're at our last question.
Yeah.
What does good sex mean to you?
Yeah. I think good sex is very simply when the people who are having said good sex agreed they had good sex, right? It's kind of weird. But I think good sex is just when we're like, we had a good time together.
Yeah.
That's good sex, right? I'm very inclusive of my definition of sex. I don't like the idea that sex only involves a penis entering a vagina or an anus. Like I'm like, that's a very restrictive definition of what sex is. I've had lovely times with people we didn't do that, and I would say that sex. Also, very few other people, when actually faced with some activity, will say, oh, you didn't actually have sex, right? They'd be like, you're clearly having sex here, right?
Yeah.
Right? So that's that. And then good can mean all kinds of things. But I also don't agree that orgasms must be involved in good sex. There so many cases where the guy I was with is like, I don't think I'll be able to come tonight. Great. We still had a lovely time, right? We both agree. Did you have a good time? Yeah. Did you have a good time? Yes.
Yeah.
Right? So I think good sex is when you both say, we had good sex, right? And good sex can involve all kinds of emotions, right? I am in the BDSM scene, in the queer BDSM scene in the city. And sometimes good sex can mean someone sobbing at the end while you hold them, right? Because that is the emotional catharsis they needed or wanted.
That's the release they need.
Exactly, right? And not even just need, just want, right?
Want, yes.
I think there's this idea of, some people have the idea that S&M and especially pain play is to like, you need to get pain because something is bad in your life. You need to leave. Sometimes you just want that, right? Like, whatever. That people want things. I try and be very open in my definition of sex. And so good sex is when we both agree, did we have a good time? Yeah, I had a good time. Did you? I had a good time, right? And then, of course, if it wasn't consensual, you didn't have a good time. So obviously that's assuming that consent is involved. That's what good sex is. Very simple, honestly.
Yeah, that's great. And if folks would like to find you, or if you want to promote anything else, I know you shared your book, but can you just let us know?
So I'm Sharang Biswas. Social media landscape is very weird right now, but I'm currently doing a lot on Blue Sky.
Okay.
So I'm Sharang Biswas on Blue Sky. You can find me there. If you're a games person, I have an itch.io page, if you know what that is. It is a platform for indie games. I'm at astrolingus.itch.io. It's ASTROLINGUS. .itch.io. I have some of my games there, not all of them. And if you Google me, you'll find a lot of my writing. I think my Wikipedia page has a bunch of my writing linked, not all, but a bunch. Check out my upcoming book. You'll also see my name in lots of different games. Like, I was one of the designers of the Avatar: The Last Airbender game that came out recently, the tabletop game. So you'll see my name in all kinds of random places. The Iron Below Remembers, the new book, and Honey and Hot Wax is the collection of sexy games I talked about, and Sharang Biswas.
And maybe we'll put some of those links in our show notes, so
that'd be awesome.
Folks can access those pretty easily.
Absolutely, and if you want to enroll in NYU and take a class with me, I don't know, feel free to do that.
Yeah, what's the name of your class that you're teaching?
The one I'm teaching this semester, which I don't know if I'll teach it every year, we might rotate. This one is called Romance, Sexuality, and Intimacy in Games, an Introduction. I also teach other classes. I teach a deep dive into experimental RPGs. I teach a class on representation games. I've taught thesis classes. Who knows what? I've taught a graduate seminar on Dungeons and Dragons.
Awesome. Yeah. Lots of options then. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
If you have questions about the podcast or anything we talked about today, please feel free to reach out to us at goodsex.podcast@nyu.edu. This email address is monitored during business hours and may take 3 to 4 days for follow-up. We are definitely open to critical and thoughtful feedback, as we didn't cover everything in this episode and might have said something that was inaccurate or that had a negative impact on someone. If you have questions about your sexual health and are an NYU student, you can connect with our Student Health Center sex expert at sexpert@nyu.edu or schedule an appointment through the Student Health Center portal. Look at our show notes for additional information and resources, including organizations, articles, books, and videos.
If you have urgent mental health concerns, safety issues, or you are worried that someone might have caused harm to you, or that you might have caused harm to someone, then you can contact NYU's Confidential Wellness Exchange at 212-443-9999. Chat with them using their mobile app or email them at wellness.exchange@nyu.edu. For anyone, NYU or non-NYU listeners, you can call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673, the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, or the National Mental Health Hotline. Simply dial 988 from anywhere in the U.S.
Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode where we continue to talk about good sex at NYU. Subscribe to the podcast to hear all of our quickies and interviews with NYU community members. Thanks to our content contributors for this episode, Bernadette Kerr, Alyssa LaFosse, Dr. Dominic Baini-Amisa, Zoe Raguzios, and to our health promotion team, Anna Genova, Jenny Mellum, Parade Stone, and Arna Dixit, and to Gotham Studios and Karen Ortman.